Let me just say this. All of the research into Harvey and Lee, everything I've accomplished, could end with one DNA test. And of course, that's between any member of Robert Oswald's family and any member of Marina's family. If those DNA tests were to show that those people are not related, then you have Harvey and you have Lee, who are not brothers.
I'm playing approximately 1 hour of a 7-hour interview I did with John Armstrong. The book is Harvey and Lee.
A lot of my work came from records in the Warren volumes that contradicted themselves. You've got just record after record of contradictions. And they were published in the Warren volumes. We all know about the duplications of Oswald being at the shooting range when he's supposed to be in Irving with his wife before the assassination. We all know about, we should know about the Curtin Rod story with Ralph Leon Yates picking up a hitchhiker on the Thornton Freeway and dropping him off at the Texas School Book Depository. I believe it was the day before the assassination. He had a package and he told Yates he was carrying curtain rods during the time of which Harvey was working at the School Book Depository. We know about the incident at the downtown Lincoln Mercury buying a car, the shooting range, Sportsdrome Rifle Range, when Oswald's, supposedly at a different location. All these things are duplications. All these things should have been investigated. Is there one that sticks out more than another? A good example would be Alan Feldt. Alan Feldt gave a detailed interview to the FBI. And Alan Feldt said that he was with Oswald, and this is from memory, but the man's name is Alan Feldt. And Feldt said that he was with Oswald at boot camp and ITR training, and then they went to radar school, and then they went to aviation electronics school in Memphis, Tennessee. He last saw Oswald in September of 1957. He first met Oswald in Camp Pendleton, California, in the fall of 1956, ITR training in Jacksonville, and then Biloxi Radar School, and then Aviation Electronics School in Memphis, Tennessee. There's no indication in any Marine Corps records, Marine Corps unit diaries, anywhere of Oswald attending a school in Memphis, Tennessee, and especially in June and July and August, because in June and July and August, Oswald took his leave and went to Fort Worth with his mother. He came back to El Toro, California, where he stayed for a few weeks. Then he was loaded onto the USS Bexar in late August en route to Japan. In fact, the last of August, I can't remember the date, he actually mailed a postcard from Honolulu to his mother at 3830 West 6th in Fort Worth. Well, then here's Alan Feldt saying that he was with Oswald at Aviation Electronics School in Memphis, Tennessee, until September. It's pretty obvious something's wrong. Another one, another very, very good one, duplication, is the radar school. Daniel Patrick Powers talks about leaving Jacksonville with Lee Oswald to the Warren Commission. He talks about leaving on May the 3rd from Jacksonville en route to Biloxi. And Powers brought his Marine Corps orders to the Warren Commission. And what was interesting is Powers said that his squadron was Squadron 3383. Now that's interesting because that's not what the Commission records say. Commission records say it was Squadron 3381. Now Powers' Marine orders, which were for him as the leader of these 6 Marines, and himself included, he was given the class to attend. The class number was AB 27037. Now, the Commission says that the class Oswald attended was AB 27330, a different number. Then you've got the class number, which Powers says was 0805. Commission says 24047. So, I don't know what's going on, but you've got 2 different records for 2 different people attending the Biloxi radar school, the radar school at Biloxi. Now, what's interesting is that there's a fellow named Sherman Cooley. Sherman was interviewed by a JFK researcher quite a few years ago, and he explained something that was not given to us through the Warren Commission. He said basically that the Platoon 1000 series went to radar school first, and they were followed by people in the 2000 series. What that means is that Lee Oswald, with Daniel Patrick Powers, had to be in the Platoon 1000 series, and a week or so later, the Platoon 2000, which Harvey Oswald, was in Platoon 2060. His photograph is in the Platoon 2060 yearbook. So we know he was in the 2060 yearbook. Now, how do we know when Harvey attended school? Look at the interview with Dujanovic. Dujanovic says that he attended school, radar school with Oswald, beginning May 13th. And that radar school ended approximately June 28th. So you have Lee Oswald and Daniel Patrick Powers attending radar school on May 4th, and you have Dujanovic attending school with Harvey on May 13th. That should have been investigated by the Warren Commission. That's just one example of records that are crossed. Another record that's just probably the record that shocked me the most, or made me really sit up in my chair, was when I spoke with the Fort Worth Independent School District. I'd read in Robert Oswald's testimony that his brother went to Stripling Junior High School in Fort Worth. Now, we know, according to Warren Commission records, that Oswald never attended junior high in Fort Worth. He left Fort Worth after graduating from Ridgely West Elementary School in the spring of 1952. He allegedly went to New York, lived with his brother John Pick, attended Trinity Evangelical School for a few weeks in New York, and then he went to public school, and then public school 44 for the remainder of his time in New York. And then he left in January of 1954 and went to Beauregard and graduated from Beauregard in the spring of 1955. And then he actually attended, briefly, Warren Easton High School in the fall of 1955. So Oswald never should have attended junior high in Fort Worth. So here's Robert Oswald saying to the Warren Commission he attended Stripling Junior High. So I wrote a letter to the principal. I called Stripling, found out who the principal was, wrote a letter. His name was Ricardo Galindo. I wrote a letter to Mr. Galindo, and I simply said, Mr. Galindo, here's the testimony from Robert Oswald saying that he went to Stripling. Here's an article when Oswald defected to the Soviet Union, and Robert Oswald says he attended Stripling. Another article that said Oswald attended Stripling. Mr. Galindo called me on the phone, and he was very nice, and he said, yes, Oswald attended Stripling. And I said, how do you know? And he said, it's common knowledge. All of the teachers here know it. And I said, well, that's fine. Are any of the teachers there that were there in 1954 when Oswald allegedly attended school? Nope, they're not. He said, why don't you go down to the Fort Worth Independent School District and find out who taught there in 1954. So I went down to the Fort Worth Independent School District. They were very nice. They told them what I wanted. And just so happens that a man named, I believe his name is Billy Sills, I'm not sure if that's right, but he was kind of a archivist for the Fort Worth Independent School District. He didn't get paid for it. It was kind of like me doing the JFK research. You just do it because that's what you want to do. You enjoy it. So this man, within just a few hours, came back with a list, a handwritten list, which he gave me, of all the teachers that had taught at Stripling in 1954. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I started calling these people. And one by one, over half of them said, the person you need to talk to is Frank Cudlady. I said, okay. I talked to Mark Summers, who was a gym teacher. And Mark Summers told me that, yes, Oswald did attend. He was in his gym class. And I said, could it have been Robert? And he says, no. He said, my first year at Stripling, I believe he said was 1952. And he said, Oswald was there in my gym class a couple of years after I started. I looked back and found out that Robert Oswald had left for the Marines in 1952. And Robert had attended Stripling in 1949, long before Mark Summers was there. So
he wouldn't have got him mixed up.
No, he would not have gotten him mixed up. So then Mark Summers referred me once again to Frank Cudlady. Well, I finally called Mr. Cudlady and introduced myself, and I just bluntly asked him. I said, Mr. Cudlady, I'm a JFK researcher. I'm researching Lee Harvey Oswald. I've talked to a number of people who taught at Stripling who said, you're the man with the answer. He said, well, how can I help you? And I said, well, did Oswald attend Stripling? And he said, sure, he attended Stripling. And I was shocked, and I said, how do you know that? And then Frank said, because I gave his records to the FBI. Now, I tape recorded that phone call. Oswald was there. I gave the records to the FBI the day after the assassination. My principal called me in the morning, 7 o'clock, said, go to school, get Oswald's records, give them to the FBI. So then what I have, and I asked him, when was it? And he says he thinks it was 1954. Then I've got, and this man was the superintendent of the Waco School District. He was an educator all of his life. He was one of 13 people selected by the United States Educational Society to go to China to advise them on education in the late 1970s. I mean, his academic credentials are pretty strong. So I thought, okay, now we've got a pretty good indication that Oswald, or a solid indication that Oswald attended Stripling. I asked Frank if he looked at the grades, looked at the attendance record. And he says he remembered that Oswald attended one semester, but he had not completed the second grade period, which would have meant one semester. So he dropped out sometime during the second semester. And if you've researched Harvey like I have, you'll know that Harvey has this pattern in Harvey's life of attending a school, not having previous transcripts from the previous school, generally means that the school would not let him stay, and he doesn't complete school. The same thing happened in Beauregard, same thing happened in New York City. I believe the same thing happened at Warren Easton High School, the same thing in Arlington Heights High School. This is a person who just never had the records forwarded to the next school. For example, he goes to New York. Where are the records from Ridgely West Elementary School? There aren't any. And Frank Cudlady told me how that was done. He said the records are always done in duplicate, so that we always send the duplicate to the new school. But both of Oswald's records were there, and we never received anything from the previous school showing where Oswald had come from. But he said, I gave those records to the FBI, they thanked me, and they left. And I locked up the school and I went home. So that's one of the best indications that there were two Lee Harvey Oswalds in junior high school.
Right. And the FBI, have they had shared any of those records?
No, of course not. I wrote to the FBI and asked them for anything on Stripling Junior High, and they came back, no records.
No records.
But let me say this. Somebody knew how sensitive those records were. Otherwise, why in the world, with a presidential assassination, why would anybody be interested in junior high school records of a 7 or 8 week period 9 years earlier? What importance of that in less than 24 hours of the assassination? Why do you send people to get those records? Somebody knew. Somebody had advanced knowledge. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone there. And do we know it was the FBI? We don't know who it was. We know that two men showed up, showed ID to Frank Cudlady, and that was it. We don't know who they were for sure. Frank did not write their names down. Frank did not have a copy machine to copy the records. Frank didn't think to ask the people who he gave the records to sign a receipt. And at that time, all the records were held by the individual schools, generally in their basements. But duplicate records, they're all over. You've got all kinds of indications that you had two Oswalds in the military. You had Oswalds in Florida and in New Orleans when Oswald was in Russia. It just goes on and on. I'd like to talk briefly, Len, share some thoughts with you about the FBI and the Warren Commission and their handling of various events and witnesses related to the Kennedy assassination. After reviewing and reading literally hundreds of FBI reports, Warren Commission transcripts, and so on, you begin to see a pattern that has developed in the way these people have approached the assassination. And by that I mean, in an ordinary investigation of the assassination of the president, certain things should be done quite promptly and quite quickly. The autopsy is a perfect example. But what I find is when an investigative agency like the FBI, who was put in charge of the investigation by Johnson, in fact, before they were put in charge of the investigation by President Johnson, I don't remember when that happened, but I think it was a day or two later, directed the FBI to head up the investigation, but I don't know if it was a day or two later. Anyway, that's not a big issue. The issue is that crucial parts of Oswald's background, which should have had very little significance, were jumped on by the FBI, I mean, instantly. And specifically, I'm talking about his employment as a teenager. Within hours of the assassination, less than 24 hours, you had FBI agents, at least alleged FBI agents, people who identified themselves as FBI agents, at Stripling Junior High School in Fort Worth, retrieving Oswald's junior high school records. Of course, the purpose of that is that Harvey attended Stripling while Lee was attending Beauregard in New Orleans, and you can't have duplicate records. The day following the assassination, on Saturday, you had FBI agents interviewing the owners of the Pfister Dental Laboratory in New Orleans. They took each individual owner in a separate room and each employee into a separate room, questioned them separately, and told them they were not to discuss the assassination among themselves with anyone at any time. They took all of the employment records, and they've never been seen again. When you find out that it was Century Arms who sold the imported rifles, sold rifles to Klein's, and you have the president of Century Arms, Feldt, calling the FBI, I believe it was the evening of the assassination, and telling them that rifle C2766 had been sold by his company in June of 1962. That's pretty strong. Yet that's overlooked because the rifle was not shipped to Oswald until February of 1963. When you have agents that appear at Klein's, sporting goods, once again, within hours of the assassination, I think within 12 hours of the assassination, you got two agents that were at Klein's. Now, these agents looked through microfilm records. There's no indication whatsoever that they found anything. They simply asked Klein's vice president, William Waldman, if they could take the tapes, the microfilms, which they did. Those microfilms were never returned, but the FBI did provide documentation which suggests or appears to show that Oswald purchased a rifle. Now, those are paper documents. The original microfilm is missing. What does that prove? Very little.
Anybody could have copied.
Anybody could have copied it. There are so many items of evidence that were jumped on immediately by the FBI. The rifle's not one of those that should not have been jumped on. It should have been. But when you get into Oswald's school records at junior high, when you get into his employment as a teenager, then you start to realize that somebody had to have known about the two Oswalds. Otherwise, what are they doing getting those records within a day of the assassination? Anyway, when you start to look at the way John Hart Ely investigated Oswald's background, he found a lot of discrepancies, a lot of duplications he didn't understand. I mentioned the Marines when he talked about Alan Graff and the fact that Oswald was at the Marine Corps Air facility in California, but all the other records and all the other FBI reports had placed Oswald at Max 9 at the Santa Ana facility. You've got the problem with Taiwan that Blakey addressed. The Warren Commission really didn't address that problem. They simply said he was in Taiwan and forgot looking at the military records. But what you do notice is the way the FBI investigates people. And what they have done is, in simple terms, go through the Warren volumes and you will find that the FBI interviewed people who knew Oswald and school teachers in grade school. Now, when you come to New York, in fact, Not only did they interview people who knew Lee Oswald in grade school, they have photographs of every class, first grade, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, all of his classroom photographs. Come to New York, and what have you got? Nothing. Find me an interview with one student who knew him in New York. Just one. Find me a class photograph. Just one. Find me an interview with any one of his teachers. Now, there was an interview with one teacher, but they dropped the ball there in New York. The reason for that is that she had two people in New York at the same time, Harvey and Lee. You get back to Beauregard. What do they do with Myra DeRoos? They interview her, but they don't interview her and report the interview that she told them, the things that she told them, they didn't report. When I showed Myra DeRoos's FBI interview to her, she said, that's not what I told this fellow. Told him things that were completely different.
So she had not bothered to read her own report?
Oh no, very few people read their own reports. How would they? The FBI does a report, it goes to FBI headquarters. How are you going to get a copy of it? When you get into Oswald's teenage employment, that becomes a real issue. When you have Frank DiBenedetto saying that, Two Jacks, you have Frank DiBenedetto saying that Oswald worked for Two Jacks a year to a year and a half, that is a problem. Because there's not enough time for Oswald to work at the other places and still work at Two Jacks. When you have the FBI interviewing people who knew Oswald in the Marines, what you will notice is they focused on both of the Oswalds, but separately. And here's what I mean by that. They show that Oswald went into the Marine Corps, Camp Pendleton, California, ITR training in Jacksonville, and so on. But they also had a report of Lee Harvey Oswald at the Aviation Fundamental School in Memphis, Tennessee, through Alan Feldt. They didn't investigate that at all. What if they had? What if they had gone to the Aviation Fundamental School? What if they got a roster of all the people that were with Oswald at the Aviation Fundamental School? At the same time, another Oswald was at Jacksonville. They ignored it. Now, they made a mistake by publishing Oswald's military records and the transcript of Daniel Patrick Powers, who read his Marine orders into the Warren Report and gave us a different class number and a different course number of the radar schools. Then, of course, there's the Taiwan episode. Did they interview anybody in Taiwan? They should have asked Lieutenant Rhodes, who was with Oswald in Taiwan, and got a list there. They should have looked at those medical records and said, what's going on here? How can he be at the hospital and be in Taiwan at the same time? They didn't do that. You go to Japan. Okay, he learned Russian. Fine. Where did he learn Russian? Interview the people that knew Oswald in Japan. That's real critical. And here's the critical part. If you look at the FBI interviews of the Marines who knew Oswald, guess where 95% of them are? California. Max 9. There's Zach Stout, Bobby Warren, George Hans Wilkins, Oswald's best friend. No interviews with those people. Find me some interviews of Marines who bunked with Oswald, described Oswald in Japan. They aren't there. There was one Marine, he was interviewed by a JFK researcher, and he flat said, the person that I was with in Japan was not the person that was accused of killing the president. The person I was with was 3 to 4 inches taller, weighed 30 to 40 pounds more than the fellow I saw on TV, just wasn't him. They focused on the Oswald in California and totally ignored the Oswald that was in Japan, because that was the person who defected to Russia. That's the person who was accused of killing the president. You can go back to Oswald's mother. It's the same type of interviews. They focused on Marguerite Oswald in the 1940s. They had lists of where she lived, her employers, way back in the 1940s. Now, when it gets into the 1950s, you've got one woman who wears the nurse's uniform and always works for cash, never has a regular job. So they can't really pinpoint this person, so they use the real Margaret Oswald, and they use her up to the mid-50s. Then, instead of interviewing all the people that she worked for in Fort Worth, that I think we've talked about before, the Clyde Campbell's men's store, the Paul shoe store, and so on and so forth, they don't interview any of those people, and they instead focus on the short, dumpy Marguerite Oswald. So what you have is a transformation of the tall Marguerite into the short one, and the tall Lee into the shorter Harvey. And they totally, in the FBI, to a great extent, ignored all witnesses who could have helped solve this problem if they simply would have interviewed people who knew the real Marguerite Oswald in the late 50s and early 60s. You read the Warren volumes, and it's supposed to be based upon documentation. And I did read the 26 volumes. I read it 16 years ago. I read every volume, and I read the report. And as I was reading the volumes, there were certain things in there that just didn't make sense. It's very interesting when John Pick was shown the photograph of Oswald standing in front of the Bronx Zoo, and he says, "That's not my brother." The Warren Commission attorney questioned him, "That's not your brother?" And John Pick replies, "No, sir." What does it mean when a brother refuses to identify a photograph that's allegedly of his brother? That's interesting. Now, there's no question you read various height discrepancies in Oswald, color of hair, color of eyes, and so on. That's a little bit less conclusive than his brother saying this particular photograph is not my brother. The next was the language. For years, of course, Marina has said that Oswald spoke perfect Russian with a Baltic accent. He would have been 19 when he allegedly taught himself to speak Russian. So this idea that Oswald taught himself Russian was just foreign to me. It just didn't make any sense. And then, with that thought in the back of my mind, constantly looking for any reference. Of course, there's reference to the Monterey School of Languages in California. Fine. There's references. The Warren Commission said he was studying Russian with an officer in Japan. Fine. Where are those references? Then when you start reconstructing his life in the military, you can do it on a day-by-day basis simply from looking at the Warren volumes and their publishing of the Marine records. Where in the world did he have time? Where did he have a few days, except for leave, military leave? Where did he have time to study Russian, and where did he go? Is there one single person that said they saw Oswald at the Monterey School of Languages? Is there one person in Japan who said that he was speaking Russian with an officer? Well, there's nobody. So what I'm getting at is when you find one discrepancy, and then you find another, and then you find another, and then you find another, and I could go on. Robert Oswald said he attended Stripling Junior High School, duplicate school records. He's supposed to be in the youth house for truancy, but yet his school records show that he had a near perfect attendance record. Robert Oswald talked about him working at Two Jacks. I interviewed the man at Two Jacks, Frank DiBenedetto, his boss, said he worked for Two Jacks a year to a year and a half. The Warren volumes, look at them, they say he worked for Two Jacks only a couple of months. So these are wide discrepancies, and they don't make sense. And as I read the Warren volumes, I continued to find discrepancies again and again and again and again and again. I don't care whether it's Palmer McBride saying he was with Oswald in 1958 in New Orleans when Oswald was in Japan in the military, whether it's Alan Feldt who said he was with Oswald in Memphis, Tennessee when Oswald was supposed to be on a ship to Japan. It goes on and on and on and on and on. The obvious things that are known, and I didn't spend much time at it. Oswald at a shooting range when Oswald's supposed to be with his wife in Irving, Texas. Oswald buying a car when he's supposed to be at another location. So this is preceding the assassination. My point is that there are so many of these discrepancies that you become intrigued, and then your mind, at least my mind, turned to the point where I was looking for discrepancies. And there are lots of them. One thing leads to another. Oswald, to me, I don't speak Russian. I don't know anybody who does speak Russian. And Oswald's whole time in Russia is kind of, because of the language problem, is kind of a mystery, as it were. In the 1990s, late 1990s, or mid-1990s, I can't remember, I read an article that was translated from Spanish about a woman who lived in Argentina, Anita Zeiger. I recognized the name. Her father was Oswald's boss at the factory where he worked in Minsk. Talked to her on the phone through an interpreter, made arrangements to go out and see her. Didn't have any idea of the questions to ask her or what I was looking for. It's just that I had an opportunity to meet someone who knew this man for a year and a half, or during the time he was in Russia. They took him to the train station when he left. I got on the plane with my friend interpreter, and we flew to Argentina. And it was nice. She invited us to her house, gave us some little drinks called mate. She had some photographs which she showed us that she had taken in Russia of various people, Oswald included. Just basically talked about Oswald and Marina. And nothing was substantive. Nothing was revealing. Nothing was, oh my gosh. The second day, just as an off-the-cuff, offhanded remark, she was talking about her language abilities, and I said, well, how is Oswald's Russian? And she turned to me, and with just the only word I can come up with is startled. A startled expression. She looked at me, kind of raised her eyebrows, and said, what? No, he didn't speak any Russian. And I was caught off guard, because in my mind, the only thing I'd ever heard year after year after year was the words of Marina. He spoke Russian with a Baltic accent. Perfect Russian. And of course, Marina's remarks are substantiated by the people that they knew in Dallas in the White Russian community, one by one in the Warren volumes, describing Oswald's ability to speak Russian as perfect. George de Mohrenschildt said he preferred to reading classical Russian literature as opposed to reading English. You don't learn that by teaching yourself Russian at age 19 in the military. It just doesn't make any sense. So my point is, and I don't mean to take a long time or make this bigger than it is, but my point is, as the weeks and months go by, and as I read FBI reports or the Warren volumes or interview witnesses, one after another things just don't make sense. And there are very few situations that I investigated where it came to a dead end. Probably the dead end, if you will, was when I called John Pick in Lynn Haven, Florida, and I asked him about his remark to the Warren Commission about the fact that this photograph was not his brother. And as I've stated before, Pick said, I gave my testimony to the Warren Commission in 1964. I'll stand by that and have nothing further to say. So there's nothing I could do but say thank you and hang up the phone. In so many words, he confirmed that his testimony to the Warren Commission was accurate. He didn't say, John, that was not my brother. He simply said, I gave my testimony to the Warren Commission. I'll stand by that and have nothing further to say. You know, when you read things in the Warren volumes that don't make sense, then that's where I look and I try and find an answer. You wonder about these things. For example, Life magazine. You open Life magazine, there's Oswald. He does not look like the Oswald that that was accused of shooting the president. Big husky kid in a classroom. Well, looks like he's got a missing tooth. Then I remember from reading the Warren volumes that Ed Vogel said he took the photograph. And he sold it to Life magazine for $75. And he said he thought he helped patch Lee up after a fight, and he thought he broke a tooth or lost a tooth from that fight. There's another lead. What do? No dental records. All you got's Vogel. So I go to Marina. And I asked Marina if she could loan me the x-rays from the autopsy. And she did. And she even gave me photographs of part of Oswald's skull with the teeth. They're dirty and gritty and green, but they're clear, very clear. He had natural teeth. The fellow in the photograph appears to have a missing tooth. I have not, to this day, seen an end to the discrepancies. I looked at a few of these documents, and one of the things I found was a medical report of Oswald in California at Max 9. What was interesting is the date on that medical record was at a time, I believe it was a day or even 2 days before the Marine Corps records show that Oswald in Japan boarded a ship in Yokosuka for the 3-week voyage to San Francisco. So it's a small thing, but it's another document that shows Harvey was at Max 9 while Lee Oswald was still in Yokosuka, Japan. And these things continue and continue and continue and continue. We've all heard about Roger Craig saying Oswald got into a Rambler. Nope. The Warren Commission says he got into a bus. When you follow those leads out, it takes you someplace. We've all heard that a person who was wearing a white shirt was taken out of the back of the Texas Theater shortly after, or at the time, Harvey Oswald was taken out the front of the Texas Theater by the Dallas police and put into a squad car. We've all heard about that. We've all heard about Oswald, a man identified as Oswald, driving a red Ford Falcon 20, 30 minutes after the assassination when Harvey was in jail. We've all heard about these things. All I have done is simply try to lay the documents side by side. He's here. No, he's here. If you've got Harvey in jail, you put him in one column. You've got somebody driving this red Ford Falcon, call him Lee if you will, put him in another column. And then go backwards and start separating these people to the best of your ability. The guy in the classroom photograph with a broken tooth, the thin guy standing in front of the Bronx Zoo, John Pick says was not his brother, put him in the Harvey column. The people that were introduced to Harvey Oswald introduced himself to William Timmer in North Dakota in 1953. Timmer says he wanted to be called Harv. First indication I heard of the name Harvey. That's why I used Harvey for one of them. He, Lee Harvey Oswald, told William Timmer in 1953 he wanted to be called Harv. 6 months later, he's in Myra Drew's home class, and Myra Drew says, "How do you want to be called?" He says, "Harvey, call me Harvey." So Myra Drew always calls him Harvey. So you go through these things. Beauregard school records, 2 people. Myra says he was in her homeroom class. Harvey, no question. But the report cards show that you also had an Oswald in homeroom class 303 on the 3rd floor of Beauregard. So you put all these things side by side, and you have 2 different people using the name Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, in Beauregard, it might seem just absolutely astounding that you would have 2 people in the 8th grade use the name Lee Harvey Oswald in the same school. Well, we all have probably known someone, if our school is any size at all, and Beauregard was a decent-sized school, that had the same last name. Smith, Jones, Williams, whatever. And they had different first names. Nobody thinks twice about that, do they? If you had a John Williams in one class, and in another class there's a Paul Williams, would you think that they're brothers related or anything? So if you've got Harvey Oswald in Myra Drew's class, he's a short, little, thin guy, and you've got Lee Oswald on the 3rd floor homeroom class, he's a big husky guy who gets in fights. Why associate those people? What would be the reason to associate those people? Now you see, what interested me one step further, let's go one step further. I have an interview that Ed Vogel gave to the local television station in New Orleans, and this was very shortly after the assassination. And I listened to it very closely. Vogel's talking about Lee Oswald, Lee Oswald, Lee Oswald, Lee Oswald, Lee Oswald. Lee wouldn't take anything from anybody. Lee would not back down from a fight, and so on. Now that's not Harvey, who Myra Drew says didn't have an ounce of fight in him. But Myra Drew said very clearly that it was Harvey Oswald in her classroom, and his best friend was Ed Vogel. Ed Vogel comes running out of the basement. Mr. Roos, a piano fell on Harvey's legs. So Dorothy Duvik and I, we go into the basement, and there in the middle of the room is Harvey with a piano on his legs. So we lifted up the piano, and that was that. So now we've got Myra Drews knowing Harvey, and Harvey and Vogel rode their bicycles together every day, according to Myra Drews. Now we've got Vogel knowing Harvey Oswald. And a week after the assassination, we've got an interview with a local TV station, and Ed Vogel talking about his friendship with Lee Oswald, who he attended CAP meetings with in the summer of 1955, a year and a few months after he knew Harvey. He talked about Lee getting in a fight with Johnny Newmeyer. I talked to John Newmeyer. He was in Las Vegas. He remembered the fight clearly. Doesn't know if he broke Oswald's tooth, but said they fought for hours, a couple hours. And his brother got involved too, Johnny Newmeyer's younger brother. Anyway, what you got is Ed Vogel clearly, according to Myra Drews, knowing Harvey. And then you've got Vogel, by his own admission, knowing Lee. You've got a very, very dangerous situation with Ed Vogel. Ed Vogel died in 1972, I believe. His father told the House Select Committee, when this House Select Committee tried to find Vogel, that he thought his son died under strange circumstances. He asked him to please investigate because he thought his son's death had something to do with the assassination of President Kennedy and his friendship with Oswald. So my take on that is, obviously, Vogel was silenced, and he happened to die. And this is something else. If you look at Vogel's death certificate, so I talked to his sister. His sister, her name is Sweetie Pie. Vogel had two sisters, and they still operate the Quality Florists shop in New Orleans, the same shop that they operated when Vogel was alive. His family operated. They still have the same flower shop. And she told me the story. He called one day from the Ochsner Clinic and said that he was not feeling good. He was in the hospital. They were going to admit him to the hospital, and they needed to do tests. But he was feeling fine. He'd be home the next day. Vogel died at the Ochsner Hospital, and that was it. He didn't die at this other memorial hospital as the death certificate states. But you see, what we're dealing with is a document. And people 50 years from now would simply look at the document and say, oh, he died at this hospital. Whereas the real truth can be had from the sisters of Ed Vogel. He didn't die at this hospital. He died at the Ochsner Clinic. And people familiar with the Kennedy assassination know about Alton Ochsner. So my point is, and I know I'm belaboring the point, but my point is, almost every avenue that I investigate has a further lead, a further something that leads you like a tree branch to a big tree branch to two smaller ones and smaller ones. It just keeps going, and it almost never ends. Well, it's my hope that I can provide a foundation. My research, my documentation will provide in the future a foundation for someone to gather up my materials and further this work. I don't consider it my work, I just consider it documents. So if a person has a particular interest in a particular area related to Harvey or Lee, get these documents from the Baylor website. See if you can expand on it and do your own research. Now, there is an end to this research. I mean, I'm sure in the National Archives, if I spent the next 3 or 4 years at the National Archives 1 month out of the year like I did for many years, I'm sure, without a doubt, I could come up with more items of interest, whether it be FBI manipulation of witnesses, Warren Commission changing testimony, direct testimony of their witnesses, whether it's indications of two Oswalds, whatever. But let me just say this. All of the research into Harvey and Lee, everything I've accomplished, could end with one DNA test. And of course, that's between any member of Robert Oswald's family and any member of Marina's family. If those DNA tests were to show that those people are not related, then you have Harvey and you have Lee, who are not brothers.